Hi, everybody. So sorry if you were with me. I had to wrap up my baby. She was crying very loudly. So if you were on just a minute ago, I'm sorry. You might have had your eardrums blasted out by her loud screeching. But that's how it is, mom life. And so we move on. One of the reasons why I'm happy to be a mom. I have to deal with some of the not so pleasant parts of the crying baby, but it's all worth it. And she does great in the wrap. So we'll continue this way. So like I said earlier, I'm really excited. This is my second episode. If you caught my first episode and my only episode so far, Mother's Intuition, my name's Amanda Baker. This is Madeline Baker. She will be taking a little snooze now in Mama's wrap. And if you're interested in these wraps, this is the boba wrap. I think it's a lot like the Moby wrap. It's the one it's very flexible, stretchy material. So I use this a lot because my daughter is a power napper and doesn't like to nap right now unless she's like wrapped or in her car seat or swing. So she sleeps really well at night though, so I'm not going to complain. But today I did my first episode on staying home as a mom, and I hope to do another one later on, really specifically talking about like finances. So if you're someone who really wants to be a stay-at-home mom, but you're not sure if you can afford it, I'm going to talk about some tips and tricks in another episode later on about that. I have to do some research and help have my husband crunch the numbers for me. And my husband and I did our first intro video the other day. This little one interrupted that too. So we got a little bit into it. Just really wanted to kind of introduce ourselves as a family. And really excited to start off today with homeschooling. But as I said, I really do want to emphasize how much my Catholic faith means to me in this channel. So I'm going to start off, I'm going to try to start off every episode with a prayer to Mary. If you're not Catholic, the reason we pray to Mary is because she is Jesus's Holy Mother, and he had so much love and respect for his mother, and we believe that she ascended directly into heaven with him, and that she is just our biggest advocate here. She's our mother as well. She's one of our biggest advocates here on earth. That's why we pray to her to ask for her intercession. So we don't pray to her to worship. We pray to her to ask for her prayers as well. And as Jesus's mother, we believe those prayers that she has for us are the most powerful. So it's basically asking you're asking a prayer to Jesus, but you, in addition, say, Mary, also pray for me. It's like the most powerful prayer chain you can ever imagine. So we'll start off with a prayer to Jesus's Holy Mother, because I believe her humbleness and just her overall grace is just so beautiful and such a good advocate for us as mothers. So in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. In the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. So sorry if I'm going to make you a little seasick, a lot of swaying. It just helps this one calm down so she doesn't scream. So I will be swaying a lot in this episode. I apologize for that, but I'm standing up at my kitchen counter, so this is the way we're going to do it. So I promise at some point I'm going to get better and be able to do fancy screenshots of articles and even video clips. I'm just not there yet. That's part of my research and finding out more about YouTube. So for now, I have nice paper copies of articles that I will be reading from. And I'm going to also reference the articles and a video. I'll talk about a video that I watched earlier today. And I'll put that in the description so that you can watch it later. But yeah, I'm just not fancy enough yet to include those in the video. So homeschooling. I was a public educator. If you didn't watch my first episode, I taught in the public school system for 5 years, and I really love my job. And this episode is not at all to bash down public education. It's not at all to bash down teachers. I have so much respect for teachers. You have no idea. I was a teacher myself, so that's my heart. And if you're a public educator, bless you. You do such amazing work. This is just about my personal decision as now a stay-at-home parent, and especially a Catholic stay-at-home parent, and my husband and I, just a decision we've made based on my personal experience in the public education system, as well as just honestly some current stuff that has been happening in the public education system that I'm just not happy with right now for my kids. And hopefully it'll be fixed one day, hopefully soon. I really believe, honestly, the best thing for the public education system would truly be to honestly kind of just scrap the whole thing and start fresh. I'm not, a master at public education. I was a teacher, but I think that we need to get some educators who have years of experience controlling this and really kind of figure out a way to reconstruct the whole thing, because I'm going to talk about some of the biggest weaknesses I just noticed as myself a teacher in the public education system. And I really think the best thing for the public education system would just be starting fresh. And I don't know exactly what that would entail, but it needs a change. There are just a lot of problems with it. And I really worry about the future for our children in general in our country. I think there's a big reason why we're so far behind in education. And I don't think it's a, inequality type thing. I think it's just the whole system's kind of shattered and it just needs to be rebuilt. So I'm just going to start off. This article is about homeschooling. It's a little old. I believe it was 2016 last updated. So, and some of the statistics are a little off, but the overall message is really good. So the first quote is, in 2012, studies showed that almost 2 million children in the United States were homeschooled. So that's 8 years ago. So I don't know if the number has really gone up or down since then, but that's a lot of kids being homeschooled. And I think there's a reason why. I mean, you might say some parents just choose it because they don't want to deal with public schools. But I think a lot of them just really want to have more involvement in their children's lives and education. And that's really what it comes down to, especially as a stay-at-home parent. There's a specific bond you really get when you're with your kid 24/7. And some people, it might drive you crazy. In fact, I mentioned this in the first episode when my husband mentioned me being a stay-at-home mom. I laughed at him, but then later thanked him. And same thing happened when he asked me to homeschool our children. And I think I might have been pregnant, or maybe my first was just born. And my husband mentioned that he thinks I should be a stay-at-home mom, a homeschool mom. And I laughed at him because I remember some of my students who were homeschooled and I wasn't the biggest fan. And not only that, but I've heard many stories about how my husband, Matt Baker, acted when he was school age. And I just can't imagine dealing with that sort of cockiness and arrogance that drove me nuts. So yes, there might be a time when my kids in, late elementary school, middle school start driving me nuts, and they might need to go to public education or private education. Hopefully we can afford private education. Our church has a fantastic school that we'd probably put our kids in, but some kids love and thrive in homeschool. And that's really one of the biggest things I have learned over the last few years watching and just having a different eye for students who could be or should be homeschooled, or even just put in private school. I really think there's a big thing to be said. I know a lot of people aren't a big fan of Betsy DeVos, who's our current, I forgot the name. She's the head of education for the president. I don't really know her personally. I don't really know a lot of her big goals. I really think it's a shame that they don't have someone who's been in education directly in that role. And it seems like they never do. And it's really a big shame in my opinion. I think it would do a lot for our country if whoever gets elected president would pick someone who's been in education to be in charge of that role, because there's just something to be said if you're in the classroom every day. If you're not, you're not going to make the same kinds of decisions as if you are in the classroom every day. However, that being said, I do think this school of choice program has some big benefits, and there's drawbacks as well. But I really think that it's fair as a parent, as a tax-paying parent, that you should be able to say, hey, I'm not really happy with the school district or the school system that my kid is zoned for. I can't really afford on my own to send my kid and pay this giant tuition to go to, private school or charter school A, B, or C. I want to pick something that I want something better for my kid. And, it's hard with the zoning laws and things like that. You should be able to have more of a say over your child's education. In fact, I was talking to a mom about that today, and it would be wonderful if you could say, as a homeschool parent, I homeschool my kids, and you get a portion of your income from taxes back. And I know that makes probably a lot of public school teachers very upset, me saying that. But once again, I was a public educator, and when this new law came out, and some of my fellow teachers were very upset with it because they were taking away money from the schools. Are they? I mean, there's still teachers that teach in those charter schools. I know they're for profit, but there's still teachers there. There's still students there. If we truly care about what's best for the students, then we should be willing to look into all these different ways that they can get educated. And I feel like as a parent, you really have your child's best interest at heart, and you should be able to choose the school that you think is best for them. So that being said, I'm going to start off with why not public education, why I personally am going to, at all costs, as of this point, avoid public schools for my kids. And we're zoned for the same school I went to school at. I really like my school, but there's still some things here that are big picture ideas that no matter where I send them, they can't ignore. For example, too much testing. No matter what public school I send my children to, even if it's the best teachers and I personally know them, they're going to have to deal with too much testing. And that's one of my biggest problems, honestly, with the school system. My mom volunteered in a developmental kindergarten class. Oh, she taught and not volunteered in a developmental kindergarten class. And they had 3 hours of computer testing when they did their state testing. Developmental kindergarten, 3 hours. I mean, that's just crazy. They couldn't even read. They had to sit there and, do like picture-based tests. And apparently it's one of those tests that gets more challenging as they get a certain number right. So it starts off reading them, the questions to them and lots of pictures and stuff. But as they get more and more right, all of a sudden it's just words and there's no vocals. And these kids would just stare blankly at the screen and say, I don't know what to do. And the only thing the teacher could say is just try your best, because you can't read the questions to the students. So I mean, that's just an example. And I experienced that firsthand. Our students were constantly testing, especially certain points of the year would just be nonstop testing. I taught in middle school in 7th grade, 6th and 7th grade science, and I taught in elementary school. And no matter what, it's just nonstop testing. It's exhausting for the teachers. It's exhausting for the students. I mean, and the teachers get frustrated because the students are frustrated for sitting at the computer for hours and hours and hours, taking these ridiculously hard tests over this insignificant knowledge. Some of it is very insignificant. I know I want my students to be able to read and do math, but I mean, some of the questions are just ridiculous, and it's just way, way too much pressure, especially for the young kids. I mean, when I went to school, when I was in elementary school, I think the first time we had to take standardized tests was in 3rd grade. I don't understand why they decided to extend that back into developmental kindergarten. I just think that's ridiculous. Even a 3rd grader, it's very difficult for them to sit that long and take these just long, exhausting tests. There's no point. I mean, I could go on for hours about just too much testing. It's serving no positive purpose in our children's education. It's really just demeaning and exhausting. And I don't want my kids dealing with it. So number 1, too much testing in general. Number 2, this is one pretty much every public school teacher is going to agree with: the large classroom sizes and limited funding. So large classroom sizes, once again, there's really not much you can say about that. Some places, like I taught in Florida, have mandates on classroom size. However, even that mandate has some wiggle room. In the middle school I taught at and everywhere in the district, so it was like, I forgot what I think it was 23 kids was the cap you could have per classroom, but the wiggle room is in the middle school, it's the 23 student average for the whole school. So as long as the average number of students in the classroom is 23 to one teacher, you could, like, I had one class of mine that had 17 kids, and then another class later on had 27. 10 different, I mean, I didn't even have enough seats for the 27. It was ridiculous. They're like crammed together. And I was just exhausted by that class period because it was just one of me. And there's all these kids with all these different needs, all these different IEPs. It was just ridiculous. So even that had its wiggle room. It was an average. So, one of my fellow teachers, I think, had 31 8th graders in her classroom. Like, these are huge kids. There just wasn't physically enough space for the kids. And then there was another class period where she had like 15 or what. It's silly. And then, in elementary school, even still, like I had 21, 22 kids my last year of teaching, and that's a very small size, but they were so challenging behaviorally that even though there was only 22, 23 of them, I was still exhausted and just completely spent by the end of the day, because there's just not enough teacher to go around for each of those students. And especially if they have individual education plans and everything, it's just way too much for one person to handle. And then limited funding. I mean, if you have limited funds, especially for kids who have, higher needs, it's so difficult because there's not enough money for extra aids. And I'm going to talk about this later, but also enough money for, what did I say earlier? I lost it. Like, oh my goodness, counselors, having school counselors. I mean, I wrote gun violence on here somewhere and I can't figure out where it is. Oh yeah, there it is. Counseling. We don't have enough money for school counselors anymore. I mean, the last school I taught at had one of the aides as the counselor, and I feel for this woman because she wasn't trained as a counselor. And she also had to do the job as sometimes like a secretary aide. It was just like this floating position. And they just kind of gave her this extra job of being in charge of behavior management. And it's just too much for one person to handle. And counselors sometimes are the first person cut, and that's where we need so much more of that funding. And then not even to begin with, general supplies and things like that. Just limited funding is just such a stretch for public education. Now here's a big one, loose morals from peers and teachers, and indoctrination of a lot of liberal beliefs. And when I say liberal beliefs, I mean, there are plenty of liberal beliefs that are great and terrific and fine, but specifically, I'm really talking about in general in this big picture part, sex education, and just how especially young kids are really indoctrinated very young to be comfortable with words regarding, I'm going to sit down now, she's sleeping, words regarding sex education, LGBTQA, and homosexuality. And I'm not saying that necessarily people who believe in those things are bad people at all. That has nothing to do with it. It's just there needs to be a certain line. And I guess that's my big thing. I'm going to mention Planned Parenthood in a second. And I know there's some, pro-choice people probably going to listen to this or are listening to this. And that's fine. You're allowed to believe what you want to believe. But I guess my biggest question to you would be, where do we draw the line? Because right now I see this line of inappropriate, and it keeps getting pushed farther and farther and farther and farther back to when our children are just this little tiny innocent child, like 2 years old, 3 years old. I mean, these are children who are literally just learning how to talk. And we've pushed this line of inappropriateness just so far back that we have these tiny little kids just entering school and are being exposed to, I mean, you could say just cuss words in general, but no, it's so far beyond that. It's kids coming in, having these extravagant knowledge of things like sex. It's just, that's disgusting. It's so vile. And the fact, I don't know if many of you know much about this, but Planned Parenthood they have sex education, which I think sexual education is very important once a child reaches an appropriate age, meaning at least after puberty. Before puberty, sex education it's just very inappropriate for a child. They're not developmentally able to understand that because they haven't actually gone through the process of being able to procreate, or their sex organs aren't even developed yet. So it doesn't make sense to talk to a child before puberty about what their body will be doing when they become growing into adulthood. So I just think, so places like Planned Parenthood have these sex education programs and curriculum, which they are actually having in schools. I have an article, which I'll post on here, about Los Angeles school that had Planned Parenthood come in and start teaching sex education. There are many schools in California, high schools in California, where Planned Parenthood has they've actually moved into the schools to set up, stations for the children, which is mind-boggling to me. And once again, a lot of people are like, oh, it's Planned Parenthood. They're there for the students. They're going to be sexually active anyway. I've heard all these arguments, but I really have grown over the course of my life as an adult, from my 20, or actually from high school through now, I'm 30, learning that a lot of those things that we were taught when we were younger that are just going to happen, they don't necessarily just have to happen. We can do something about it. We can tell our kids that being super sexually active is not okay and it's not good for you. It's okay to say those words. It's okay to tell our kids there are certain things that are good for you and certain things that aren't. And it's just like telling your kid you shouldn't eat a whole bag of Doritos for lunch. That's not good for your body. We should be able to tell our kids what things are good and not good for their bodies. And talking about sex too young is one of those things that's just developmentally inappropriate. One of the other articles I was reading about Planned Parenthood being in education in Massachusetts, a lot of people were quite upset in the school districts because Planned Parenthood was teaching sex ed curriculum. And it was actually an interview with a student who was part of this program, and he talks about, and I know it's just, someone else's opinion, so who knows how accurate it is, but I believe it to be true based on what knowledge I have of Planned Parenthood, that this student talked specifically about how they were basically just told, you're going to have sex anyway. So, here's how you get an abortion. It's going to be better for you. You're not prepared to have a kid. I mean, just completely indoctrinating this, these young people who have no experience or knowledge of this. And they're just going out thinking, oh, okay, this is normal. They're not even told, like, here are the mental consequences of having sex too early. Here are some of the spiritual consequences, because that's another thing I talk about. There's no Christian background in this anymore. When I was in school, there was still, a little bit of Christian background in education. And now it's almost completely gone. And it's just such a shame, because there are so many benefits. There's a reason why our country was built upon Christian principles. And we should be able to tell our kids, certain things are or aren't okay. And a big thing, like I said, sex education, there needs to be a limit of what age these topics are introduced. When I taught middle school, it was middle school, but even sixth graders, I had some sixth graders come in who were just the sweetest, tiniest, most innocent little things you've ever seen in your life. And then some of them who are just so completely belligerently foul-mouthed. Oh, it was just gross. And you see the innocent ones change pretty quickly. Some of them were more naive and kind of sheltered than others, so they kind of just ignore it. But you still saw how quickly it changed a lot of even the little pure innocent ones. And the ones who thought they knew what, different things about sex and everything they were so misinformed. And it's just because they get it from TV and media. Hopefully not their parents, but they're introduced to all these topics so young, and they have no knowledge of what any of it means. So they're just this little immature brain. Even a 6th and 7th grader, they have this tiny little immature brain that just has no idea what they're talking about. So when I had to teach sex ed to the older kids, the 6th and 7th graders, they just would act like they knew everything. But Mrs. Baker, what if we know? I'm like, you don't know. You're a baby. You don't know. I'm sorry. And it finally came to the point where they realized they wouldn't know when you'd give them the actual test about, human anatomy and everything. And these kids they just have no idea. They're so immature. And that's the thing we have to remember, that these kids are immature. Even middle schoolers are very, very immature. Even high schoolers. Think about yourself as a high schooler. I know I was extremely immature and just unprepared and unknowledgeable about everything. And they think they know everything about the world. And that's the thing. We've given them this false reality that they know it all and they can handle it all. They can't. They're just babies, even high schoolers. They're just these little immature brains that are trying to figure out the world. And we need to realize that, and we need to take that a little more seriously. They might be in high school, but they're not ready to take it all on yet. We need to be more cautious of that. So that's honestly, I know I kind of rambled on there, but I'm very passionate about that. I think that's a big issue. In public education, especially, we just act like they can handle it all. They're grown-ups now. No, they can't. And we need to be more careful about it. And we need to be teaching them important things like morals. Morals need to be taught. It needs to be instilled. And it's really starting to lose focus, especially in middle school and high school in our public education system. And it's not the teacher's fault entirely. I'm sure there are some teachers out there who support a lot of this, which is really hard. Okay, another one, biased opinions with limited factual backing. Once again, if you're an adult in our beautiful country and you are LGBT, you've decided you're homosexual or you're bisexual or you're transgender, you're an adult. Okay, that's fine. This is a country where you're free to make that choice. It doesn't have a place, in my opinion, at all in education. It just doesn't. There's a big difference between teaching a child, you need to be kind to one another, no matter what kind of beliefs they have. It's very important to be kind. That's part of Christ's message to us, treat one another with respect and love. But it is not part of Christ's message to just say, oh, you're a sinner of X, Y, and Z. You do these terrible things. Oh, keep doing them. It's fine. It's fine. You're good. It's important to love your neighbor and love thy enemy, and pray for your enemy and your neighbors and your brothers and sisters. That's so important, to pray for one another. But I think, once again, these LGBT, especially the transgender movement, especially in young kids, telling them that they can be whatever gender they decide to be is very, very unhealthy. And it's really scary to me because there's this big movement that doctors are allowing and suggesting that children take hormone puberty blockers and things like that. And I was listening to, actually, it was like a 2-year-old interview with a pediatrician who was talking about these long-term effects that we might start seeing soon in young people turning into adults who've been on hormone puberty blockers for a long time. But we didn't have any like research behind this for a long time, except for cancer patients. And they were being recommended for children. And it's like, and they're still being recommended for kids. And we're still telling in public education, not necessarily from the teachers once again, but we're telling our youth that it's okay to just be whatever you want and it doesn't matter. And I think we need to be more discerning when it comes to that and realize it does matter. It does. We're also telling our kids an unhealthy message to say, you can be whatever you want to be. Okay, there's a big difference between doing that and saying, you're wonderful the way you are. You're beautiful the way you are. I think we've kind of lost that message that tells our children that you are 100% perfect the way you are. You don't need to change, your physical appearance and have surgery to be more beautiful. We just need to be more accepting of the person as they were created. So, and I know, once again, there might not be a popular opinion, but I think there's a lot of truth, especially biblical truth behind that. God made us perfect the way we are. Another one, and I'll get into this in another episode, probably with Matt, is climate change. And I'm a science major, so I do believe that humans have contributed a large portion to some of the major problems, especially our planet faces. Obviously, pollution, yes, of course. Climate change, I've had a pretty drastic opinion change on. I used to believe climate change was 100% man-caused issue. I've kind of changed my opinion on that, largely because I feel like it's just so overly heavily used as this big bargaining chip for political reasons. And the more and more I listen to how extreme and crazy it gets, it's gotten crazy. It makes me really sad. It's almost become like this cult religion thing, and it's just very unhealthy, I believe. And I feel like there's a big difference. I worked at an environmental education school. I love the environment. I love nature. I am truly just an absolute science, nature nerd lover. But it's something very unhealthy when we basically have told our youth that they are poisoning the world, and they are the poison of the world, that people are the poison of the earth, and the earth would be so much better without us. That's so toxic. God wants us to take care of our planet Earth, but he didn't tell us we are toxic to Earth. Like, yes, we sometimes make bad decisions when it comes to taking care of our planet. I could name a billion of them, but it doesn't matter. We can't just say like people are, if we need to get rid of people, we need to stop having babies. It's become this really unhealthy cult-like atmosphere. And I think that kind of needs to be more carefully taught to our education, to our children. And also another big one, and once again, I'm not blaming the teachers. Some of this is parent taught, is not enough Christian principles. I mentioned that. Not enough counseling, and it has kind of equated to gun violence. And as we all sadly know in our public education. And I think a big thing that would help that is more professionals, more counseling available at every single school. Because there are kids who have lots of issues and struggles, and they're not being heard because back to limited funding and large classroom sizes. If they aren't a very vocal child, they're just silently sitting there suffering and no one's noticing. And so we need to have more professional help at those levels as well. I also have written down why not public education, just because teachers are really generally disrespected, unfortunately, in the public school system. And I think this is also a very toxic environment, is the unions, the teacher unions. I have been a part of teacher unions. I've paid my dues, and I found them to be extremely just toxic places. These teachers would just rant and rave about how they hated the principals so much. And and good principals that I really enjoyed. I couldn't believe it would just be our union meeting after a staff meeting, and just people would gripe and complain about the stupidest, pettiest things. And I'm like, I don't have time for this. Most of the time, I'd have to sit there because I'm in the union, but I was only in the union for legal protection if I needed it against, if a student, they kind of scare you with that tactic. Like, oh, once every year a teacher gets sued for X number of millions of dollars for, X, Y, or Z that a student claims you did. And so it really does scare you as an educator, especially first couple of years. So you kind of get scared into these unions, and they're just really unhealthy, toxic places. So I think that's another big one that's kind of bringing down the public school systems. All right, not private schools. So it's much, much shorter, mostly because it's pretty simple of why I am not going to be in a private school. But I do want to start out with a quote from Pope John Paul, Saint John Paul II. Catholic education aims not only to communicate facts, but also to transmit a coherent, comprehensive vision of life in the conviction that the truths contained in that vision liberate students. I love that. In the most profound meaning of human freedom. Oh, just such rich words. I'll read it again. Catholic education aims not only to communicate facts, but also to transmit a coherent, comprehensive vision of life and the conviction that the truths contained in that vision liberate students in the most profound meaning of human freedom. I think there's just so much to be said about a Christian and or Catholic education. There's just so many beautiful, rich, healthy values and morals taught in these schools. And once again, not all of them. They're not all perfect. And I'll get into that in a second. But even if you're not Catholic, I know people who went to Catholic schools that weren't Christian. And some of them were actually, I'm sure their parents might not have been atheists, but they didn't actually believe necessarily in God either. But their parents still valued that, those morals and those values that were being taught there. And I think there's something very healthy to be said about that. Our main reason for not doing private school, honestly, is it's too expensive. And my big thing is paying for K through 12 private school education will probably result in my husband and I not being able to assist our children at all with higher education if they so choose to do so. If I don't have the statistics of how much tuition is, but it's way more than you would paying for a child's college, especially for many people who pay for daycare on top of that. Paying for daycare through 12th grade education, if you're doing all the way through private school, is just insanely expensive. And the only way we actually might do private education, like I said, our church has a fantastic school. The only way we've discussed it is if I get a part-time teaching job there, because our school that our church does is fantastic. I wish more schools did this. They offer 2 days a week. Homeschool students can attend the school there. So it's really fantastic because the parents kind of get the best of both worlds. They're allowed, they have 2 days a week that they can have their kids in their school, and, parents get a little, I say parents, probably mom mostly gets a little bit of a break, maybe gets to spend time with little ones if they have little ones at home. That's really fantastic. The school age kids are in school. They can be home with a baby or, toddlers and have more of that private one-on-one time. And also the kid gets that little bit of, school familiarity, maybe some classes that their parents aren't that familiar or feeling that competent in. It's really a fantastic way for them to get that exposure. So I might take a job at our school that our church has. And in that case, hopefully for some tuition breaks, that would be a great way for our kids to attend private school. But here's another reason why that we really would think through why not private schools is that even many Catholic and Christian schools are feeling the pressures for a lot of these social justice issues, and not feeling like they can really stick with their roots on a lot of these moral principles and beliefs, which is unfortunate. I'm going to try to wrap things up here kind of quickly. So I'm just going to go through the pros for homeschooling that I have found. More one-on-one time with my kids and personalized education. That's pretty self-explanatory. I want to be able to stay, have this wonderful bond with my children and be able to continue to grow that bond as much as possible. And there's probably going to be a point where we drive each other crazy. Maybe there's a point where, one or more of my kids decide that it's just not working for them, or I decide it's just not working for us. And they go to school at that point. But that personalized education is huge because every student is so different. It's really a blessing when you can provide that personalized touch for your children. And of course, my experience as a teacher, that is a huge thing. I know some parents don't feel comfortable doing homeschool themselves because they don't have that training. Well, I do. So that is one of the reasons we're really considering homeschooling, is because we can use my years of knowledge and all my education for a really wonderful purpose of educating my own children. And personalized curriculum, like I looked it up, I can post some. There are so many options for homeschooling curriculum. You can do mostly online, you can do a combination, and you can kind of just do what you want based on the materials you find. There are so many resources out there you can choose from, and constant hands-on learning opportunities. You could constantly be outside if that's the thing your kids love to do. You can, you can steer, a lot of stuff out of the books, or just do some gentle reading to support your hands-on projects and hands-on learning. It can be more than just sitting in a desk doing worksheet after worksheet that you might get in a public or even private school. Unlimited field trips. I joined a group in my area, which is a homeschool group of parents who literally, they just get together and do all these different field trips around the area, and they pay money to do it. I mean, that's totally your choice. You don't have to. But the great thing is you don't have to go to every one. If your family's on a budget, you pick one a month to go to, or however you want to do it. It's so fantastic. And then you get that social aspect of being able to get together and get to know other moms and parents who are doing this, and share thoughts and ideas and activities. It's just a great way to be able to socialize your children as well as the adults. And there are also great ways to get your kids into sports and things like that as a homeschool parent as well. And this is a big one. And this is actually in the article I have here: flexibility to create your own schedule. My husband works in a restaurant, so his days off aren't weekends because that's when he's busy. So the fact that I could schedule our homeschool week to really be whenever during the week, I could have our weekends be on Wednesdays and Thursdays and do homeschooling Friday through Tuesday. I mean, we can do whatever works best for us. And that's what I love, is that we can make homeschooling work. We wouldn't do it on Sundays, but we can make homeschooling work for our family and make that schedule work for us. Big one, no testing. Yay. Well, I mean, I say no testing. There's no standardized state mandated long hour long testing. So we can, once again, that's a huge benefit for any child to not have to sit in front of a computer and mindlessly read questions for hours on end. And then this is a big one, connect with a variety of different kids and ages from different homeschooling groups. I think one of the biggest disadvantages of attending a typical education system in general, except for Montessori, is that the kids are only exposed to their peer group, like within that age. Like third grade is like 8 and 9 year olds. That's it. That to me is a huge disadvantage. Where else in our society are we only exposed to people our exact age? Like, you may only play with other 25-year-olds. That's it. No, it's so unnatural. It makes zero sense. We are constantly interacting with people, a variety of age groups. It makes so much more sense to say, hey, you 4-year-olds, why don't we play with the 6-year-olds and the 3-year-olds? You get a variety of experiences and knowledge when you have kids intermingling. And I know it's not necessarily perfect. You don't want your 6-year-old sacrificing their education to help the 3-year-old with things, but kids learn so much better by teaching. That's actually one of the things I know as an educator. When we were talking about levels of education, when you're trying to get a kid to excel at a topic, the way they can excel the most is by teaching that content to someone else. So if you have a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old at home, having your 6-year-old teach your 4-year-old addition, not only helps the 4-year-old feel more confident, but the 6-year-old feels like a master because they are now the teacher. And that is just so you can see the light bulbs going off when they get to teach it to someone else. And then, of course, the integration of the Catholic faith is a big one for us as well. The article I read, the quote from earlier, talks about some of the financial benefits, is that you can organize your family's finances how you feel. And so, you're not organized into necessarily the rhythm of school where you are strictly following that school-based schedule. And that kind of goes with the fact that, you can get so many of your resources whichever way is most budget friendly for you. So, if the online only program is cheaper than some of the big textbooks for homeschooling, you can do whatever works best for you. You can get a lot of resources even at the library, which is very helpful and free. And off-season prices for school materials. Like, you don't have to go school shopping at specific times of the year. You get your materials when you need to, and you can get them whenever they're cheapest for you. Cheaper vacations, because you don't have to go on summer vacation or whatever vacation, Christmas vacation, when everyone else does. You can take a family vacation in the middle of February if you want, while standardized testing is going on. You don't have to stick with spring break schedules, which saves a lot. And then it also mentions tax benefits. That you can get some reimbursement by homeschooling. And I'm not sure if that works in every state or how that works, but it's just one that it mentioned here. Here's some other positives about homeschooling that I really thought were interesting. Financial education. This is a huge one. I have always said that I think public schools are missing a huge opportunity, that they don't offer a life skills mandated curriculum. We're talking about these mandated sex ed classes that teach their children about contraceptives and abortion. That's mandated, but we're not mandating that they learn how to make a budget and cook their own meals and here's healthy foods that you should be eating as an adult. And we should have a class about what you need to do after high school. Are you getting a job? Are you going to college? Are you going to trade school? None of this stuff is mandated. And it just seems so bizarre, because we have all these young people going into adulthood and they have no idea how to be an adult. And we just expect the parents to teach it to them. And in homeschooling, the parents do teach it to them. That's the great thing. But if the parents are not aware because they're so busy with their jobs and stuff, it's one of those things that kind of gets pushed aside and forgotten. And it's very obvious when you meet some of the young adults out there. It's very obvious they don't know a lot of these things. Heck, I don't even know a lot of these things. And my parents taught me a lot of it. Especially my dad was very into being frugal. So, I mean, some of it's learned behavior, but I think it really should be mandated. This article also mentions, and I'd be interested. This article also mentions, I'd be interested to find more information about it. Higher income for the children. It says children with homeschooling background pose a better chance of being more balanced professionals as adults than children that attend public school. And I'd be interested, and it says also have a higher likelihood of earning more money than children who are in the public school system. I'd be interested to find out more about that. It does mention something about interacting with different age groups, which is something I mentioned earlier. And actually, even though a lot of people say, oh, homeschooling are kind of socially awkward kids, it depends. If you're part of some of these co-ops and homeschool groups that I mentioned that I've started connecting with already, there's a lot of ways to socialize your kids, and it's even better because they're socialized with a variety of age groups, not just strictly their one age that they are in. And I think that's a huge benefit, and more interactions with one-on-one with adults, because if you have one mom there with 4 kids and, there are times how many families, you have so many adults there that they're interacting with, and that's a great way for them to grow up. Okay, so how to make it possible. I said, number 1 is connect with a local homeschooling group. I'm already connected with 3 and my daughter's 2. So Facebook is a great resource. Reach out, search homeschool near you. You'll probably find a bunch of them. Message a bunch of people, find out which one works best for you. Start visiting them early. There's a lot of great ones out there. If you're in a church, check out your church's community. Talk to some younger parents. Find out who's homeschooling and see what kind of Catholic or Christian groups you can get connected with that way. I'm already starting to connect with 1 to 2 Catholic homeschool groups, and then one that's just a bunch of people in our area who do, like I said, the field trip type stuff, which is really exciting and fun too. And then find a curriculum that works best for you. Some kids love technology and are going to love just being on the computer and connecting on the internet. Some kids are big bookworms. My 2-year-old just loves books. So we're going to do a lot of book-based and hands-on education. but find what works best for you and your kids. And then use a variety of resources. That's the great thing about homeschooling is you get to use what works best for you. And don't be afraid to reach out to teachers and educators. If you want to ask me a question, I will get an email address hooked up there here. Yeah, and search out resources, search out people, talk to different teachers and stuff who might want to do tutoring just to help out as well. And then budget is a big thing. Budget for extracurricular activities and curriculum. I mean, and parents have the budget for sports and extracurricular activities anyway, but you'll probably have to do some extra number crunching for homeschooling because you won't be working as me. Like I'm not going to be working, but I might personally be taking on some friends' kids for like daycare and preschool as well. I'll have to look more into that, but yeah, I'm really excited for our homeschooling journey. We'll actually be starting this year as my child is turning 3. So we'll start really getting into some of these groups and finishing off my basement for a little classroom, and I'm really excited about it. If you have any questions about homeschooling or what I said about public education, please let me know. I'm an educator, so I feel like this is kind of one of my areas of expertise. Obviously, I don't know everything. And once again, this isn't about bashing public schools. I am a product of public schools. I loved my teachers and everything. And I taught at many of them. But keep in mind, you just really have to do whatever is best for your child. And that might mean one of your kids attends public school and one's homeschooled or however you need to do it. But you have to do what's best for your children, but just keep in mind the best thing you can do as a parent, I firmly believe, is just be involved no matter where they go. Be as involved as possible. Constantly be talking to your child and their teachers. Don't be a helicopter parent, but be involved. Reach out, volunteer, do what you can to be there for your child as they're going through their educational career. That's the most positive thing you can do to make a difference. I will pray for all of you, and I hope you have a fantastic Tuesday. And I'm going to pray for all of our teachers and principals out there, and for our politicians that they help figure out and solve some of these big crises in our education system. But once again, if you have any questions about homeschooling, I really think it's a great option. I'm so excited to do my part for our kids as they grow up. And I hope you have a wonderful day. And talk to you soon. Bye. Oh, and keep smiling.